At my sister's wedding, they gave me a plate with leftovers, so I stood up during the vows and exposed every secret they tried to bury. My name's Olivia. At my sister's extravagant wedding, my family treated me like I was invisible, serving me scraps while everyone else feasted. No warning, no explanation, just champagne toasts for her and table scraps for me. They didn't know that I had already uncovered their lies, years of financial manipulation, hidden assets, and a ruined engagement. They orchestrated behind my back. In the end, they weren't the ones who silenced me. I silenced them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I arrived early at the Bellewood Estate, not because I was excited, just because I wanted to see if they'd really go through with it, if they'd actually treat me like an afterthought at my own sister's wedding. The June sun blazed across the manicured gardens, casting golden light across the venue like it was blessing everyone except me. Guests in designer outfits milled around the entrance, clutching gift boxes, handwritten cards, and programs with embossed silver lettering. I held nothing but my invitation, which had arrived 3 weeks later than everyone else's. When I spotted my mother, Victoria, near the entrance, I slowed my pace. She wore a custom lavender gown that probably cost more than my rent, her practiced smile firmly in place. My father, Richard, stood beside her, checking his Rolex every few minutes, greeting guests with firm handshakes and claps on the shoulder. Camille, my sister, was nowhere to be seen, probably secluded in some luxurious bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids and champagne flutes. They didn't notice me right away. When they did, my mother's eyes slid over me like I was a server she might need to flag down later. "Oh, Olivia," she said flatly, "you made it." "I got the invitation," I answered, ignoring the chill in her voice. She gave a thin smile. "I wasn't sure it reached you. Your address changes so often these days." I had lived in the same apartment for 3 years. My father didn't speak. He just checked his watch again, as if my arrival was making him late for something more important. A coordinator in a headset approached, clipboard in hand. "You must be Olivia," she said, consulting her list. "You're seated at table 19. I looked at the seating chart displayed on an ornate mirror by the entrance. Table 19 was in the far corner of the reception tent, behind a large column, next to the kitchen entrance. I scanned for my parents' names. Table 1, of course, front and center. Someone handed me a place card. Off-white. No gold foil like the ones I'd seen in my mother's Instagram posts showcasing the exquisite attention to detail in Camille's wedding preparations. Mine was printed in a different font, like an afterthought. I stood for a long time staring at that place card. I'd helped my sister choose the original wedding stationery 6 months ago. We'd spent hours on typography and paper weights. I should have left. That would have been the logical, self-respecting thing to do. But instead, I tucked the card into my clutch and walked toward the ceremony site like a ghost attending her own haunting. The ceremony was set to begin at precisely 4:30. Rows of white chairs adorned with blush roses and trailing greenery faced an elaborate floral arch. I sat alone in the back row, beside an elderly woman who kept asking if I was the wedding planner and a couple who were clearly friends of the groom's family. "And how do you know the bride?" the woman asked. "I'm her sister," I replied. Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, shouldn't you be up at the front? Or in the bridal party?" I forced a smile. This is where they wanted me. Before she could respond, the string quartet began to play, and everyone turned to watch the procession. 6 bridesmaids in blush silk, none of them me. My mother had told me it would complicate the visual aesthetic to have me stand with the other girls. "You're so much shorter than Camille's friends," she'd explained, as if height was the real issue. When my father stood to walk Camille down the aisle, a lump formed in my throat. She was radiant, floating on his arm in a cloud of white tulle and lace. He beamed at her like she was the only daughter he'd ever had. I swallowed hard and willed my face to stay neutral. The guests dabbed at their eyes. The groom, Elliot, looked appropriately moved. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, trying to ignore the space I should have occupied up front. The ceremony proceeded without a hitch. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, I felt eyes dart nervously in my direction. I didn't move. Not then. That wasn't my moment. Not yet. At the reception, I approached table 19 with measured steps. As expected, I was seated with distant cousins who couldn't remember my name, the wedding photographer's assistant, and a couple who had apparently been invited by mistake and were friends with the family who had previously booked the venue. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "You're Victoria's daughter?" one cousin asked, squinting at me. I thought there was just Camille. "There's two of us," I replied. "Always has been." The centerpiece at our table was noticeably smaller than the others. The menu cards were missing. When the servers came around with champagne for the toast, they skipped our table entirely. I had to flag someone down, only to be told they were running short and would return. They never did. Dinner was served with precision and flair, to every table except ours. By the time the servers reached us, they were rushing, dropping plates with mumbled apologies. My chicken was cold, the sauce congealed. I stared at it for a long moment, then glanced up to see my mother watching from the head table, quickly looking away when our eyes met. It was during the father-daughter dance that my mother's friend Diane approached my table, champagne flute in hand. "Olivia, darling," she said, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "It's been ages. Your mother mentioned you've been struggling lately? Something about losing another job?" I hadn't lost a job. I'd been promoted 6 months ago at the marketing firm where I'd worked for 2 years. "Must be difficult," she continued, "watching Camille so settled while you're still finding your way." Before I could respond, a server appeared at my elbow. "Excuse me, miss. The kitchen staff prepared this for you." He set down a plate, wrapped in foil. When I peeled back the corner, I found a hodgepodge of leftovers, scraps of various entrees hastily thrown together. Diane's eyes widened slightly. "Oh my," she murmured. "Well, better than nothing, I suppose." As she walked away, I heard her whisper to another guest. "Poor thing. Victoria says she shows up at family events expecting to be treated like Camille, when she's barely even part of the family anymore." I sat there, staring at that plate of leftovers, as the realization crystallized. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't bad luck or poor planning. Every slight, every mistake, every exclusion was deliberate, a carefully orchestrated reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. When speeches began, my father stood, glass raised. "Today, we celebrate our beautiful daughter Camille and welcome Elliot into our family." He launched into a story about Camille's childhood, her accomplishments, her special bond with him. "Some people are just born extraordinary," he said, eyes shining with pride. "From the moment she came into our lives, we knew Camille was meant for greatness." He never mentioned me, not once. As if I hadn't grown up in the same house, hadn't been part of the same family photos, hadn't existed at all. My mother's speech was more of the same. "Our perfect girl," she called Camille, the daughter every mother dreams of. I sat very still, hands flat on the table, breathing measured and deep. The woman beside me shifted uncomfortably. "Aren't you also their daughter?" she whispered. "Allegedly," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. When the speeches ended and music resumed, I slipped away from the table. Not rushed, not obvious, just quiet and controlled. I found a secluded spot on the estate's veranda, overlooking gardens that cost more to maintain for a month than my annual salary. The sun was setting, painting the sky in pinks and golds that matched Camille's carefully curated color scheme. I leaned against the stone balustrade and thought about how long this had been happening, this slow, meticulous erasure of my existence. It wasn't one moment. It was thousands of moments, small cuts I'd ignored until now. Because today, when I picked up that plate of leftovers and saw the pity in Diane's eyes, something inside me didn't break. It clarified. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old family photos. There I was, always slightly off-center, always a step behind. Camille. In our family Christmas card from 3 years ago, they'd used a photo where I was half turned away, my smile caught in an awkward transition. It was the best one of Camille, my mother had said when I questioned it. A message popped up on my screen from my cousin Megan. "Are you okay?" That seating arrangement was cold, even for Aunt Victoria. I typed back, "Did you know they're paying for Elliot's MBA?" She replied instantly, "What? I thought his family was covering it." "Nope," I wrote. "Dad's company is funding it through the Future Executives program they created last year." "But didn't they refuse to help with your master's degree? Said they didn't believe in handouts?" I stared at her message for a long moment. Exactly. I hadn't planned to act tonight. I'd told myself I would sit quietly, endure the indignities, and leave with my dignity intact. But as I stood there, watching the celebration through windows that framed a family I was supposedly part of, I knew I couldn't walk away this time. The plate of leftovers wasn't just a meal, it was a message. And it was time I sent one back. I returned to the reception just as the cake was being cut. Camille and Elliot stood together, laughing as they posed with the silver knife. My father's arm was around my mother's waist, both of them beaming with pride. The perfect family portrait. I moved slowly through the crowd, not drawing attention, just making my way toward the head table where my place should have been. The MC was talking about love and new beginnings. The photographer was positioning for the perfect shot, and I was done being invisible. I picked up a champagne flute from a nearby table and a dessert fork from another. With deliberate precision, I tapped the glass, creating a clear, ringing sound that cut through the chatter. Heads turned. The MC paused. My mother's smile froze. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet tent. My father stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Olivia, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I replied, still smiling. "After all, what are weddings for if not bringing families together?" Camille was watching me, her eyes wide, uncertain. I'd known that look since we were children, the one that said she knew something was wrong but wouldn't step in to fix it. "To my sister Camille," I began, raising my glass higher. "Congratulations on your perfect day, your perfect dress, your perfect life. And to my parents, who spared no expense to create this flawless event." My mother was moving toward me now, her smile strained but intact for the benefit of the watching guests. "Olivia, you've had too much to drink," she said through gritted teeth. "Let's step outside." "I haven't had anything to drink," I replied. "No one served our table champagne. Must have been an oversight, like my invitation arriving late, and my place card being printed in the wrong font, and my dinner being served cold. So many oversights." The crowd was shifting uncomfortably now. This wasn't the toast they'd expected. "To my family," I continued, "who gave me a plate of leftovers while they feasted. A perfect metaphor, don't you think, for how you've treated me my entire life." "That's enough," my father hissed, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. "It's not nearly enough, but don't worry, I'm not staying for dessert. I just wanted to give Camille and Elliot my gift." From my clutch, I withdrew an envelope, cream-colored, expensive paper, the kind my mother would approve of. Inside is everything I've learned about our family in the past year, I said, holding it up. The offshore accounts, the tax evasion, the reason my fiancé suddenly broke off our engagement last spring because Dad threatened to pull funding from his startup if he married me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's face drained of color. My mother's hand flew to her throat. But most importantly, I said, turning to Elliot, there's proof that the money funding your MBA comes with strings attached. They don't just want a son-in-law. They want controlling interest in your father's company. The merger isn't a suggestion. It's the price of their daughter. Elliot's expression shifted from confusion to shock. He turned to Camille, who looked equally stunned. She's lying, my father said, voice booming with false confidence. Olivia has always been troubled, always jealous of her sister's success. I smiled then, calm and certain. The documents are already with the SEC. I'm just giving you a courtesy copy. I placed the envelope on the cake table and stepped back. Congratulations again, Camille. I hope your marriage is more real than my place in this family has ever been. Then I turned and walked out, straight-backed and steady, not running, not hiding. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, high and desperate, trying to salvage the moment. My father was already on his phone. Camille was crying. But I kept walking. Through the tent, across the lawn, past the valet stand where attendants were, watching with wide eyes, having heard everything through the open tent flaps. I got into my car and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cried. I had simply, finally, refused to eat the scraps. They'd left me. As I drove away from Bellewood Estate, the weight I'd carried for years seemed to lift. The plate of leftovers they'd given me wasn't just an insult. It was liberation. Because now I knew, with absolute certainty, that I deserved a place at the table. And if they wouldn't give me one, I would build my own. I didn't go straight home after leaving the wedding. I drove through the city as twilight deepened into night, past boutiques with mannequins wearing wedding gowns, past restaurants where families were celebrating together, past parks where couples held hands on evening walks. The world kept turning, oblivious to the fact that I had just set fire to the bridge connecting me to my past. Eventually, I found myself parked outside the office building where I worked. The lights were off, the weekend silence a comfort after the chaos of the wedding. I sat in my car and stared up at the windows of the marketing firm where, despite what my mother told her friends, I was thriving. Senior brand strategist at 32. My latest campaign had increased client revenue by 40%. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I left Bellewood. Texts from cousins, from family friends, even one from Camille. What have you done? I ignored them all and called the only person who had never made me feel like an afterthought. Liv? Marcus answered on the second ring. How was the wedding from hell? Marcus had been my best friend since college, the person who'd helped me pick up the pieces after my parents orchestrated the end of my engagement to Ben last year. He was the one who'd encouraged me to look into my father's business dealings, after overhearing a conversation at his law firm that mentioned the Harrington family name. I did it, I said simply. I told them I knew. Silence, then a low whistle. All of it? Enough. I gave Elliot the file about the MBA funding and the merger plans. Holy shit. He paused. Are you okay? I considered the question. I'm better than okay. I'm free. When I got home to my apartment in Riverside, I kicked off my heels and stood barefoot on the cool hardwood floor. The silence enveloped me, not oppressive, but peaceful. My place wasn't large or luxurious, but it was mine, paid for with my own success, not family handouts or guilt money. I changed out of my carefully chosen dress, the one I'd spent too much on, hoping it would somehow make me acceptable in their eyes, and pulled on soft pajamas. Then I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and did what I'd been preparing to do for months. I opened the digital folder labeled Family Business and began transferring files to a secure cloud drive that Marcus had helped me set up. Krabenkawi. Statements showing irregular transfers to offshore accounts, emails between my father and Ben's venture capital investors, the contract for Elliot's MBA with the fine print about equity transfer in his father's shipping company. It had taken me months to gather it all, piece by piece, each discovery a small betrayal that built into something I couldn't ignore. The final piece had fallen into place just last week when I accessed the Family Foundation's tax filings and found my name removed as a beneficiary, replaced by Camille and Elliot's future children. Children who didn't exist yet had more claim to my grandmother's legacy than I did. As I worked, another text came through from my mother. "You've embarrassed yourself in this family. We need to talk about damage control." Not an apology. Not concern for how they treated me. Just damage control. I texted back a single sentence. "I have copies of everything." Then I silenced my phone and continued working until dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across my kitchen. I hadn't cried. I hadn't raged. I had simply, methodically, claimed my power back. By morning, my inbox was flooded. Some messages were from wedding guests expressing shock or offering support. Others were from family members demanding explanations. One was from my father's attorney, suggesting we discuss matters privately before irreparable harm is done. Too late for that. I showered, dressed in crisp business clothes, and walked to the cafe on the corner for coffee. The barista smiled and called me by name. "The usual Olivia?" Such a simple thing. To be recognized, to be known. Yet, it felt profound after a lifetime of being overlooked. While waiting for my coffee, I checked my professional email and found a message from a potential client who had attended the wedding as a friend of Elliot's family. "Your integrity was impressive," she wrote. "I'd like to discuss having your firm handle our rebranding." I smiled at the irony. My family thought I was destroying my reputation, but in some circles, standing up for yourself was actually admired. When I returned to my apartment, there was a sleek black car parked outside. My father leaned against it, trying to look casual but failing miserably. He straightened when he saw me. "Olivia." "Dad." I didn't break stride, continuing toward my building entrance. "We need to talk," he said, following me. "What you did last night was completely unacceptable." I turned to face him, coffee in hand, keys in the other. "What part? Revealing your manipulation of Elliot's family?"
"Or refusing to quietly accept the plate of scraps you gave me." His face flushed. "You took private family matters and made them public. You humiliated your sister on her wedding day." "No," I replied calmly. "You humiliated me by treating me like I didn't deserve a place at my own sister's wedding. The plate of leftovers was just the final insult." "That was a kitchen mistake," he said dismissively. "You're overreacting." Was it also a mistake when you threatened Ben's funding if he married me? Or when you removed me from Grandma's foundation? Or when you told your friends I was unemployed when I'm actually more successful than Camille has ever been without your help? He had the decency to look uncomfortable, at least. Those are complicated situations you don't fully understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You and Mom decided a long time ago that Camille was the daughter worth investing in. I was just extra. An afterthought. The one who got the leftovers." "That's not true." "It is true. And now everyone knows it." I unlocked my building door and stepped inside, but he caught it before it closed. "The SEC filing," he said, voice lower now. "You can't do that. It would destroy the company." I looked at him for a long moment. "I haven't filed anything with the SEC, not yet, but I could." Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by calculation. I'd seen that expression my entire life, weighing options, measuring value. "What do you want?" he asked. And there, It was. He thought this was a negotiation, a power play for money or position or recognition. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "That's what you've never understood. I just wanted to be your daughter. To have a real place in the family, not the scraps left over after Camille took what she wanted." He stared at me, genuinely puzzled. "Then why do all this?" "Because sometimes the truth is its own purpose," I replied. "I'm done pretending things are fine when they're not. I'm done accepting leftovers and telling myself I should be grateful." I stepped into the elevator and held his gaze as the doors closed between us. Back in my apartment, I sat on the couch and finally allowed myself to feel the magnitude of what I'd done. Years of silent compliance, of accepting my second-class status in the family, had ended in a single night. There would be consequences. Relationships fractured beyond repair, holiday invitations that would never come. But there would also be freedom, the freedom to stop measuring my worth against Camille's, the freedom to build a life that wasn't defined by what my parents thought I deserved. My phone rang. Camille's number. I hesitated, then answered. "How could you?" she demanded, voice thick with tears. "It was my wedding day." "How could I?" I repeated. "How could you let them seat me at the farthest table? How could you let them serve me leftovers? How could you stand there while they acted like you were their only daughter?" "I didn't know about the seating," she said, "or the food. That wasn't my fault. But you knew how they treated me. You've always known." Silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken truths. "Elliot's family is furious," she finally said. "They're talking about calling off the merger. His father thinks they were tricked into the whole relationship." "Were they?" I asked. Another long pause. "I love Elliot," she said, but her voice wavered. "I loved Ben too," I replied. "But that didn't stop Dad from making sure he left me." That's not the same thing," she protested. "Isn't it? They decided who we were allowed to love, who deserved happiness. They served me leftovers, Camille, actual leftovers, on my sister's wedding day, like I wasn't even worth the same meal as everyone else." I heard her inhale sharply. "I didn't know about that, I swear." Maybe she didn't. Maybe she'd been so caught up in her perfect day that she hadn't noticed how they treated me. Or maybe she'd trained herself not to see, the way she'd been doing our entire lives. "I'm not sorry for what I did," I told her, "but I am sorry it had to happen on your wedding day." After we hung up, I sent an email to Marcus with instructions to release certain documents to Elliot's family lawyer. Not everything, just enough to prove I wasn't bluffing. Then I turned off my phone, opened my balcony door to let in the spring breeze, and allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated peace. The plate of leftovers they'd served me wasn't just an insult. It was a wake-up call. You can't keep accepting scraps and expect to feel whole. Sometimes you have to walk away from the table entirely and build your own feast. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old family photos. There I was, always slightly off-center, always a step behind Camille. In our family Christmas card from 3 years ago, they'd used a photo where I was half turned away, my smile caught in an awkward transition. "It was the best one of Camille," my mother had said when I questioned it. A message popped up on my screen from my cousin Megan. "Are you okay?" That seating arrangement was cold even for Aunt Victoria. I typed back, "Did you know they're paying for Elliot's MBA?" She replied instantly. "What? I thought his family was covering it." "Nope," I wrote. "Dad's company is funding it through the Future Executives program they created last year." "But didn't they refuse to help with your master's degree? Said they didn't believe in handouts?" I stared at her message for a long moment. Exactly. I hadn't planned to act tonight. I told myself I would sit quietly, endure the indignities, and leave with my dignity intact. But as I stood there, Watching the celebration through windows that framed a family I was supposedly part of, I knew I couldn't walk away this time. The plate of leftovers wasn't just a meal, it was a message, and it was time I sent one back. I returned to the reception. Just as the cake was being cut, Camille and Elliot stood together, laughing as they posed with the silver knife. My father's arm was around my mother's waist, both of them beaming with pride. The perfect family portrait. I moved slowly through the crowd, not drawing attention, just making my way toward the head table, where my place should have been. Asodice, Mzizi was talking about love and new beginnings. The photographer was positioning for the perfect shot, and I was done being invisible. I picked up a champagne flute from a nearby table and a dessert fork from another. With deliberate precision, I tapped the glass, creating a clear, ringing sound that cut through the chatter. Heads turned. The MC paused. My mother's smile froze. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet tent. My father stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Olivia, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I replied, still smiling. After all, what are weddings for if not bringing families together? Camille was watching me, her eyes wide, uncertain. I'd known that look since we were children, the one that said she knew something was wrong but wouldn't step in to fix it. "To my sister Camille," I began, raising my glass higher. "Congratulations on your perfect day, your perfect dress, your perfect life. And to my parents, who spared no expense to create this flawless event." My mother was moving toward me now, her smile strained but intact for the benefit of the watching guests. "Olivia, you've had too much to drink," she said through gritted teeth. "Let's step outside." "I haven't had anything to drink," I replied. "No one served our table champagne. Must have been an oversight, like my invitation arriving late and my place card being printed in the wrong font, and my dinner being served cold. So many oversights." The crowd was shifting uncomfortably now. This wasn't the toast they'd expected. "To my family," I continued, "who gave me a plate of leftovers while they feasted. A perfect metaphor, don't you think? For how you've treated me my entire life." "That's enough," my father hissed, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. "It's not nearly enough, but don't worry. I'm not staying for dessert. I just wanted to give Camille and Elliot my gift." From my clutch, I withdrew an envelope, cream-colored, expensive paper, the kind my mother would approve of. "Inside is everything I've learned about our family in the past year," I said, holding it up. "The offshore accounts, the tax evasion. The reason my fiancé suddenly broke off our engagement last spring, because Dad threatened to pull funding from his startup if he married me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's face drained of color. My mother's hand flew to her throat. "But most importantly," I said, turning to Elliot, "there's proof that the money funding your MBA comes with strings attached. They don't just want a son-in-law. They want controlling interest in your father's company. The merger isn't a suggestion, it's the price of their daughter." Elliot's expression shifted from confusion to shock. He turned to Camille, who looked equally stunned. "She's lying," my father said, voice booming with false confidence. "Olivia has always been troubled, always jealous of her sister's success." I smiled then, calm and certain. "The documents are already with the SEC. I'm just giving you a courtesy copy." I placed the envelope on the cake table and stepped back. "Congratulations again, Camille. I hope your marriage is more real than my place in this family has ever been." Then I turned and walked out, straight-backed and steady, not running, not hiding. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, high and desperate, trying to salvage the moment. My father was already on his phone. Camille was crying. But I kept walking. Through the tent, across the lawn, past the valet stand, where attendants were watching with wide eyes, having heard everything through the open tent flaps. I got into my car and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cried. I had simply finally refused to eat the scraps they'd left me. As I drove away from Bellewood Estate, the weight I'd carried for years seemed to lift. The plate of leftovers they'd given me wasn't just an insult, it was liberation. Because now I knew with absolute certainty that I deserved a place at the table, and if they wouldn't give me one, I would build my own. The morning after the wedding, I woke to sunlight streaming through my apartment windows. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened. My phone was flooded with messages, some supportive, most accusatory. I silenced it and made coffee, savoring the quiet clarity that comes after a storm. My apartment wasn't grand like my parents' house, or Camille's new penthouse, but it was mine, earned through my own hard work and determination. The walls were painted the deep blue my mother had called too dark for a young woman's space. The art was modern, bold pieces I'd collected from local artists, not the safe, tasteful landscapes that adorned the Harrington family homes. I sat at my small dining table and opened my laptop. The digital folder containing all my evidence was still open from the night before. I hadn't bluffed completely. I did have copies of everything, but I hadn't sent anything to the SEC, not yet. That decision would depend on what happened next. My doorbell rang at precisely 10 a.m. I knew who it was before I checked. Victoria Harrington never arrived unannounced, but when she did appear, it was always at a time that conveyed purpose and control. 10 o'clock. Not too early to seem desperate, not too late to indicate the matter could wait. I opened the door to find her standing there in a tailored beige pantsuit, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless despite what must have been a sleepless night. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed her distress. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice carefully modulated. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She surveyed my apartment with a quick, assessing glance, taking in the comfortable but modest furnishings, the overflowing bookshelf, the half-finished painting on an easel near the window, a hobby I'd taken up that she'd never bothered to ask about. "I assume you're here about last night," I said, not offering her a seat. She remained standing as well, her Hermes handbag clutched like a shield. "You've created quite a situation, Olivia." "I didn't create anything," I replied calmly. "I just exposed what was already there." Her lips thinned. "You humiliated your sister at her wedding. You threatened your father's business. You accused us of crimes in front of everyone we know. And yet, you're not denying any of it." She looked away briefly, composing herself. "Families are complicated. We've made decisions you don't understand, with contexts you're not privy to. Like the decision to serve me leftovers at my sister's wedding. What complicated context justified that?" A flush crept up her neck. "That was unfortunate. A misunderstanding with the catering staff. And my invitation arriving weeks late, my place card being different from everyone else's, my table being hidden behind a column. All misunderstandings." She sighed, a sound of exasperation rather than remorse. "You've always been so sensitive. Olivia, always looking for slights where none exist." "Do you really believe that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Or is it just easier than admitting how you've treated me?" Her composure slipped just for a moment. "What do you want? Money? A position in the company? Your own apartment in that building where Camille's friends live?" And there it was, the Harrington solution to every problem. Throw money at it, until it goes away. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "That's what you've never understood. I just wanted to be treated with the same love and respect you give Camille. I wanted to be your daughter, not an obligation." She looked genuinely puzzled, as if I'd started speaking a language she didn't understand. "We've given you everything, your education, connections, opportunities. You've given me the minimum required to maintain appearances," I interrupted. "And you've done it with constant reminders of how grateful I should be, how I don't quite measure up to Camille's achievements, or fit into the Harrington image. My mother's face hardened. This display of yours has consequences. Your father is meeting with lawyers right now. Elliot's family is threatening to pull out of not just the merger, but 3 other joint ventures. Camille is devastated. I'm sorry for Camille, I said, and meant it, but I'm not sorry for telling the truth. She took a step toward me, eyes flashing. And what about Ben? Are you sorry for dragging him into this? For implying he only left you because of your father's interference? I felt a cold stillness settle over me. That wasn't an implication. It was a fact. Dad threatened to pull his seed funding if he stayed with me. I have the emails. Her expression faltered. You can't possibly... I have everything, Mom. Every email, every bank transfer, every conversation Dad thought was private, including the one where he told the foundation board that funding my graduate program would be throwing good money after bad because I didn't have Camille's potential. She sank onto my couch, her legs seeming to give out. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at her manicured hands. What happens now? She finally asked, her voice smaller. That depends on you, I replied, on whether you're finally ready to acknowledge what you've done, not just to me, but to everyone who doesn't fit your perfect Harrington narrative. She looked up at me, really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. When did you become so formidable? The question caught me off guard. There was something in her tone, not quite admiration, but recognition, as if she was seeing a reflection of herself in me, just not the reflection she'd expected. I've always been formidable, I said. You just never noticed because you were too busy watching Camille. A strange silence fell between us, not comfortable but not entirely hostile either, more like the quiet that comes after a long-held breath is finally released. The SEC filing, she said eventually. How much time do we have? I haven't filed anything yet, I admitted, but I will if things don't change. She nodded slowly, processing. And what would change look like to you? It was a negotiation now, territory she understood, but I wasn't interested in horse trading. It looks like honesty, I said. It looks like treating me with the same respect you'd give any other human being, let alone your daughter. It looks like stopping the manipulation of everyone around, you including Elliot and his family. She stood, smoothing her pants with practiced hands. I'll talk to your father. Good, I said. And while you're at it, tell him about Ben. Tell him I know what he did, and that I have proof. Tell him I'm not going to be silent anymore, not about any of it. She paused at the door. You know, you could have just talked to us. You didn't have to create this spectacle. I laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. I've been trying to talk to you for 20 years, Mum. You just never listened. After she left, I made another cup of coffee and sat by my window, looking out at the city stretching below. People moved through their Sunday routines, jogging, walking dogs, meeting friends for brunch. Normal lives, with their own complex webs of love and hurt and history. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How are you holding up? Surprisingly okay, I replied. My mother just left. Nuclear fallout? More like the beginning of negotiations. Want me to come over? I can bring those almond croissants you like. I smiled at the offer. Actually, yes, but not just for moral support. I need your legal brain. I think it's time to draft some terms. When Marcus arrived bearing not just croissants, but also coffee and a comforting hug, we spread my evidence across the dining table and began formulating a plan, not for revenge, but for resolution. For a path forward that didn't require me to keep accepting leftovers or them to keep serving them. You know, Marcus said, reviewing an email chain between my father and Elliot's father, this could actually be prosecuted as fraud. They literally created a scholarship program with the sole purpose of gaining leverage over his family's business. I nodded. I know, but I don't want them in jail. I just want them to stop. And to acknowledge what they did to you, he added. Yes, I admitted. That too. We worked through the afternoon, drafting a document that outlined conditions, not demands but boundaries. Transparency in family business dealings, a formal apology to Elliot's family, recognition of my role and achievements, not as a Harrington, but as Olivia, a person in my own right, and most importantly, an acknowledgement of what happened with Ben. I needed them to admit on record that they had deliberately sabotaged my relationship to protect their image and business interests, not for revenge, but for my own healing. To know I hadn't imagined it, hadn't been too sensitive or overreacting. As evening fell, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Olivia, it's Ben. My heart stuttered. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since he'd walked away with a vague explanation about different paths and timing not being right. Ben, I managed, this is unexpected. Your parents called me, he said, his voice tight. They said you're making accusations about why we broke up. I closed my eyes, unsurprised but still disappointed. Of course they'd try to get ahead of the story, to paint me as unstable or vindictive. Not accusations, I replied carefully, just the truth, that my father threatened to pull his investment in your startup if you stayed with me. Silence stretched across the line. Then, how did you know? The confirmation shouldn't have hurt after all this time, but it did, a sharp pang where I thought the wound had healed. I found the emails, I said, between him and your lead investor. They were quite explicit, more silence than a heavy sigh. I should have told you, I thought it would hurt you more to know, more than thinking you just didn't love me enough to stay. I'm sorry, Liv. I was a coward. The apology washed over me, not healing exactly, but clarifying, like rain washing away dirt to reveal what's been buried underneath. Why are you calling now? I asked. Your father offered to reinvest double his original stake if I'd tell everyone you're lying. I wanted you to know I refused. It was the last thing I expected. You did? Yeah, he said, voice stronger now. I'm done letting your family dictate my life or my integrity. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new development. My parents were scrambling, reaching out to anyone who might help contain the damage. But something had shifted. People were starting to choose truth over convenience, authenticity over appearance. The next morning, my inbox contained an email from Elliot with the subject line, "We need to talk." He suggested meeting at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory away from both families. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking exhausted but resolute. The golden boy from the wedding was gone, replaced by someone older, warier. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I know this is awkward. That's one word for it," I agreed. He folded his hands on the table. "I want you to know that Camille didn't know about the MBA funding or the merger conditions. She's as shocked as I am." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but finding none. "I believe you. Camille has always been good at not looking too closely at things that might disrupt her perfect world." He winced but didn't argue. "Your parents are powerful people. They presented everything as opportunities, mentorship, family connections. By the time I realized there were strings attached, I was already in love with Camille?" I supplied. He nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "And trapped in their web, just like you've been your whole life." It was strange, this moment of connection with someone who should have been an adversary, but he was right. We were both caught in the same intricate, poisonous web of Harrington manipulation. "What will you do now?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "My family wants me to walk away, from the MBA program, from the merger, from Camille. And what do you want? I want to marry the woman I love, he said simply, but not at the cost of my family's business or my integrity. I felt a twinge of sympathy. For all his privilege and golden boy status, Elliot was facing the same impossible choice I'd faced with Ben: love or integrity, heart or honor. There might be a third option, I said slowly. One where you don't have to choose. His eyebrows rose. I'm listening. I explained the document Marcus and I had drafted, the conditions that would allow all of us to move forward without destruction. Accountability without annihilation, truth without total war. You're offering them a way out, he observed. I'm offering all of us a way forward, I corrected, including you and Camille. He studied me with new respect. You could destroy them, you know, with what you have. I know, I said, but that's not what I want. What do you want, Olivia? Really? The question hung between us, weightier than it seemed. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Acknowledgement? I want to stop accepting leftovers, I said finally, and I want them to stop serving them, not just to me, but to everyone they see as less valuable or useful to their grand plans. Elliot nodded slowly. I think I can help with that. 2 days later, we all gathered in my father's office. Neutral territory was no longer an option. My parents sat behind the massive mahogany desk, a united front. Camille perched on a leather chair to their right, pale but composed. Elliot stood. Beside her, hand on her shoulder, Marcus sat next to me, legal pad ready. My father looked older than he had at the wedding, the strain of the past few days etched in new lines around his eyes. He cleared his throat, ever the executive taking control of a difficult meeting. We're here to resolve this situation, he began, to find a path forward that preserves the family and our business interests. We're here for the truth, I corrected. Everything else comes after that. My mother's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. The dynamic had shifted, and for once I wasn't the one scrambling to fit into their narrative. Marcus slid the document across the desk. These are Olivia's terms for moving forward. They're reasonable, fair, and non-negotiable. My father skimmed the paper, his expression darkening. This is extortion. No, Elliot said, surprising everyone. It's accountability, and it's actually quite generous, considering the alternatives. My father looked up sharply. You're taking her side now. I'm taking the side of truth, Elliot replied calmly. As should we all. Camille spoke for the first time, her voice small but steady. I want to know about Ben. Did you really threaten his funding if he stayed with Olivia? The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to the carefully constructed family mythology. My father's face flushed. My mother looked away. It was a business decision, my father said finally. His company wasn't viable, and the Harrington name— Stop, Camille interrupted, shocking us all. Just stop. Answer the question, yes or no. My father's jaw worked. Yes, he admitted, but it was for Olivia's own good. He wasn't right for her. That wasn't your decision to make, I said, keeping my voice level despite the emotions churning. Inside, just like it's not your decision whether Elliot is right for Camille. We only want what's best for our daughters, my mother interjected, finding her voice at last. No, I said, you want what's best for the Harrington image and business interests. If those aligned with what was best for me, it was coincidental, not intentional. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken truths, of patterns too long established to be easily broken. The document requires a formal acknowledgement of what happened with Ben, Marcus pointed out, along with several other key points. My father's hand tightened on the paper. And if we refuse? Then tomorrow morning, the SEC receives evidence. Of fraud, tax evasion, and illegal business practices, I said simply, along with recorded conversations that would make fascinating listening for your board members and investors. It wasn't a threat. It was a choice. Their choice. Honesty or consequences. Truth or continued deception. You would do that to your own family? My mother asked, genuinely incredulous. You served me leftovers at my sister's wedding, I replied, while telling everyone I was unemployed and unstable. What exactly do you think family means? Something shifted in the room then, a realization perhaps that the old rules no longer applied, that the daughter they had dismissed and diminished for years had found her power not in their approval, but in her own truth. My father picked up a pen, his hand surprisingly steady. We'll need time to review this with our lawyers. You have until tomorrow, Marcus said. The terms are non-negotiable, but the specifics of implementation can be discussed. As we stood to leave, Camille caught my arm. Liv, wait. I paused, looking at my sister, really looking at her past. The perfect exterior to the person underneath. She'd always been the golden child, the one who fit seamlessly into the Harrington mold. But now I saw uncertainty in her eyes, cracks in the carefully constructed facade. I'm sorry, she said, voice barely above a whisper. About the wedding. About everything. Are you sorry it happened, or sorry you got caught? I asked, not unkindly. She flinched. Both, I think. I knew they favored me. I just didn't know how far they'd gone to erase you. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The leftovers, she continued. I had no idea. I would never have allowed that if I'd known. But you allowed everything else, I pointed out. You watched them push me aside for years and never said a word. Tears filled her eyes. I know. I was afraid if I defended you, they'd turn on me too. The honesty surprised me. It was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from Camille before. What happens now? She asked. Between us, I mean. I considered the question carefully. I don't know. That depends on what kind of relationship you want to build. Not the one our parents designed, but something real. Something we choose. She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. I'd like that. To choose, I mean. For both of us. As I walked out of my father's office, Marcus beside me, I felt a curious lightness. Not the giddy relief of victory, but the steady calm of standing in my own truth. You okay? Marcus asked as we stepped into the elevator. I thought about the plate of leftovers, about Ben's confession, about Camille's tears and my parents' shaken confidence, about all the small, painful steps that had led to this moment of reckoning. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm free. The plate of leftovers hadn't just been an insult, it had been a gift. The final indignity that forced me to see clearly what had been happening all along, to stop accepting scraps and demand my rightful place, not at their table, but at my own. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people who should have protected you, but healing doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means building something new from the broken pieces, something stronger, more authentic, and completely your own. I'd taken up that she'd never bothered to ask about. I assume you're here about last night, I said, not offering her a seat. She remained standing as well, her Hermes handbag clutched like a shield. You've created quite a situation, Olivia. I didn't create anything, I replied calmly. I just exposed what was already there. Her lips thinned. You humiliated your sister at her wedding. You threatened your father's business. You accused us of crimes in front of everyone we know. And yet you're not denying any of it. She looked away briefly, composing herself. Families are complicated. We've made decisions you don't understand, with contexts you're not privy to. Like the decision to serve me leftovers at my sister's wedding. What complicated context justified that? A flush crept up her neck. That was unfortunate. A misunderstanding with the catering staff, and my invitation arriving weeks late. My place card being different from everyone else's, my table being hidden behind a column. All misunderstandings. She sighed, a sound of exasperation rather than remorse. You've always been so sensitive. Olivia, always looking for slights where none exist. Do you really believe that? I asked, genuinely curious. Or is it just easier than admitting how you've treated me? Her composure slipped just for a moment. What do you want? Money, a position in the company, your own apartment in that building where Camille's friends live. And there it was, the Harrington solution to every problem. Throw money at it, until it goes away. I don't want anything from you, I said. That's what you've never understood. I just wanted to be treated with the same love and respect you give Camille. I wanted to be your daughter, not an obligation. She looked genuinely puzzled, as if I'd started speaking a language she didn't understand. We've given you everything, your education, connections, opportunities. You've given me the minimum required to maintain appearances, I interrupted. And you've done it with constant reminders of how grateful I should be, how I don't quite measure up to Camille's achievements or fit into the Harrington image. My mother's face hardened. This display of yours has consequences. Your father is meeting with lawyers right now. Elliot's family is threatening to pull out of not just the merger, but 3 other joint ventures. Camille is devastated. I'm sorry for Camille, I said, and meant it, but I'm not sorry for telling the truth. She took a step toward me, eyes flashing. And what about Ben? Are you sorry for dragging him into this, for implying he only left you because of your father's interference? I felt a cold stillness settle over me. That wasn't an implication. It was a fact. Dad threatened to pull his seed funding if he stayed with me. I have the emails. Her expression faltered. You can't possibly. I have everything, Mom. Every email, every bank transfer, every conversation Dad thought was private, including the one where he told the foundation board that funding my graduate program would be throwing good money after bad because I didn't have Camille's potential. She sank onto my couch, her legs seeming to give out. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at her manicured hands. What happens now? She finally asked, her voice smaller. That depends on you, I replied, on whether you're finally ready to acknowledge what you've done, not just to me, but to everyone who doesn't fit your perfect Harrington narrative. She looked up at me, really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. When did you become so formidable? The question caught me off guard. There was something in her tone, not quite admiration, but recognition, as if she was seeing a reflection of herself in me, just not the reflection she'd expected. I've always been formidable, I said. You just never noticed because you were too busy watching Camille. A strange silence fell between us, not comfortable, but not entirely hostile either. More like the quiet that comes after a long-held breath is finally released. The SEC filing, she said eventually. How much time do we have? I haven't filed anything yet, I admitted, but I will if things don't change. She nodded slowly, processing. And what would change look like to you? It was a negotiation now, territory she understood, but I wasn't interested in horse trading. It looks like honesty, I said. It looks like treating me with the same respect you'd give any other human being, let alone your daughter. It looks like stopping the manipulation of everyone around. You, including Elliot and his family. She stood, smoothing her pants with practiced hands. I'll talk to your father. Good, I said. And while you're at it, tell him about Ben. Tell him I know what he did, and that I have proof. Tell him I'm not going to be silent anymore, not about any of it. She paused at the door. You know, you could have just talked to us. You didn't have to create this spectacle. I laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. I've been trying to talk to you for 20 years, Mum. You just never listened. After she left, I spent the day sifting through emails and messages. Some family friends expressed shock and dismay at my outburst. Others, mostly those who'd been on the periphery of the Harrington circle, sent quiet notes of support. I always wondered why they treated you differently, wrote my mother's college roommate. Good for you for standing up for yourself. By evening, my apartment felt too small, too confined. I needed air, space, perspective. I grabbed my keys and headed to the one place I always found clarity, the waterfront park where I'd spent countless hours during my darkest moments after Ben left. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as I walked along the shore. Families were packing up beach gear, couples strolled hand in hand, a group of teenagers laughed around a small bonfire. Normal lives, untouched by the Harrington drama. I found my favorite bench and sat watching the waves lap against the shore. The rhythm was soothing, constant, a reminder that some things remain steady even when everything else is in chaos. I thought I might find you here. The voice startled me. I turned to see my grandmother Eleanor standing a few feet away, elegant as always, in linen pants and a light sweater. Grandma, I said, genuinely surprised. Does Mom know you're here? She smiled wryly and settled beside me on the bench. Victoria doesn't dictate my schedule, dear, though she certainly tries. At 82, Eleanor Harrington remained the only person who could make my mother nervous. She had built the original Harrington business alongside my grandfather, quietly guiding the company's ethical policies while he handled the public face. When he died, everyone expected her to step back. Instead, she'd maintained a controlling interest and a sharp eye on the board's decisions. I heard about the wedding, she said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Quite the statement you made. I tensed, unsure which side she was taking. I suppose Mom called to tell you how I ruined everything. Actually, Megan told me, sent me a video, in fact. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. I particularly enjoyed the moment when Richard nearly swallowed his boutonniere. A surprised laugh escaped me. You're not angry? Olivia, she said, turning to face me fully. I've watched for years as they pushed you to the margins of this family. I've spoken to your mother about it more times than I can count. Each time, she assured me I was imagining things, that you were just different from Camille, needed different handling. She shook her head. I should have done more. It's not your responsibility, I said. Perhaps not, but I understand. What it's like to be underestimated, to be offered scraps when you deserve a feast. She covered my hand with hers, her skin paper-thin, but her grip surprisingly strong. What you did took courage, standing in your truth when everyone expects you to stay silent always does. Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, validation I hadn't realized I still craved. They're saying I did it out of jealousy, I said quietly, that I couldn't stand to see Camille happy. Of course they are. It's easier than admitting they've been treating you as less than for years. She paused, something flickering in her eyes. Did you know that when your grandfather and I started the company, his partners wanted me to stay home, to be the corporate wife who hosted dinners and said nothing in meetings? I shook my head. For 3 years, I sat at those dinners, smiling and pouring drinks while they discussed my ideas as if George had thought of them. One night, a potential investor made a comment about women not understanding finance. Your grandfather laughed along with him. Her gaze grew distant with memory. The next day, I withdrew half our startup capital, which came from my family, not his, and told George he could either publicly acknowledge me as a full partner or find himself without funding. I stared at her in amazement. I never knew. That. Few do. It's not the kind of story that fits the Harrington mythology. She smiled. The point is, sometimes you have to force people to see you, especially when they benefit from your invisibility. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and lights twinkled on across the bay. "What happens now?" I finally asked, echoing my mother's earlier question. "That depends on what you want, dear, not on what they're willing to give you, on what you decide to create for yourself." Her words settled deep inside me, illuminating a path I hadn't fully seen before. Not a path of revenge or even reconciliation, but of creation. Of building something new from the ashes of what had been burned away. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I know I'm done accepting leftovers." She squeezed my hand. "Good, because you've always deserved the whole meal, served on the finest china." When I returned home, there was a text from Marcus. "Elliot reached out, wants to meet tomorrow, just you." I stared at the message, surprised. Elliot and I had never been close. He'd always existed in Camille's orbit. Another star drawn to her light. What could he possibly want to discuss with me alone? "Where?" I texted back. "Café Luca, 10 a.m. Says it's important." I sent a quick confirmation. Curiosity piqued. Then I turned my phone off, made a cup of tea, and settled into the quiet of my apartment, grateful for the sanctuary it provided from the storm I'd unleashed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed to mock the turmoil of human emotions. I dressed carefully, not in the Harrington-approved pastels my mother preferred, but in a bold red dress that made me feel strong, visible, impossible to ignore. Café Luca was busy when I arrived, the morning crowd lingering over lattes and pastries. Elliot sat at a corner table, dressed down in jeans and a simple button-up rather than his usual tailored suits. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, his normally perfect hair slightly rumpled. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "Curiosity won out," I replied. "What's this about, Elliot?" He took a deep breath. "First, I want you to know that I had no idea about any of it. The MBA funding conditions, the merger pressure, what happened with Ben, none of it." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but finding none. "I believe you." Relief flashed across his features. "After you left the wedding, everything fell apart. Camille was crying, your parents were trying to do damage control, and my father was demanding answers about the merger terms you mentioned." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know what to believe, so I called my family's lawyer and had him look into the MBA funding arrangement. And you were right. There were clauses buried in legal jargon that essentially tied funding to my father's company agreeing to the merger." His expression hardened. "They lied to me, used me to get to my family's business." The admission hung between us, weighted with implications. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "That can't be easy to accept." "No," he agreed, "but neither is realizing you've been complicit in someone else's erasure." I blinked, surprised by his insight. "That's what they did to you, isn't it?" He continued, "systematically erased you while elevating Camille. The seating at the wedding, the late invitation, the different place cards. It was all deliberate." "Yes," I said simply. "It always has been." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about all the times I saw it happening and said nothing. The family dinners, where your accomplishments were glossed over while Camille's were celebrated. The holiday photos, where you were literally pushed to the edges of the frame. The way Richard always introduced me to business associates as his future son-in-law, but barely mentioned your name when you were standing right there. His awareness was unexpected, touching something deep inside me. It wasn't just that he had noticed, it was that he was admitting his own role in maintaining the status quo." "What about Camille?" I asked. Where does she stand in all this? Pain flashed across his face. She's conflicted. She loves you, I know she does, but she's also been trained her entire life to accept her position at the center of everything. To question that now means questioning her whole identity. And your wedding? Postponed, he said firmly. I won't marry into a family built on manipulation and lies, not without some serious changes. I sat back, processing this development. What exactly are you saying, Elliot? I'm saying I want to help. He leaned forward, voice low but intense. Your parents are scrambling right now trying to contain the damage. My father is threatening to pull out of every business arrangement with Harrington Enterprises unless there's full transparency about what was happening. You have leverage, we both do, and I think we should use it. To do what? To force real change, not just in how they treat you, but in how the whole company operates, the kind of backdoor deals and manipulation they used with my family and with Ben. It's not just personal, it's unethical, possibly illegal. It was a startling proposal coming from the man who was supposed to be the crown prince of the Harrington Empire by marriage. But looking at him now, I saw something I hadn't before, a person with his own moral compass, struggling to find true north in a sea of deception. Why would you do this? I asked. You'd be risking your relationship with Camille. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply, and because if Camille and I have any chance at a real relationship, it can't be built on her parents' manipulation. There was conviction in his voice, a steadiness I'd never associated with the polished, somewhat passive man I'd known before. What did you have in mind? I asked. He pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between us, a plan for transparency, accountability, and restructuring, both in the family and in the business. As he outlined his ideas, I felt a strange sense of alignment, of finding an unexpected ally in what I had assumed would be a solitary battle. Elliot wasn't just talking about making amends. He was proposing systemic change, a complete rewiring of the Harrington power dynamics. By the time we finished our coffee, something had shifted between us, not friendship exactly, but partnership. An alliance born of shared recognition that the status quo was unsustainable. There's one more thing, he said as we prepared to leave. Camille wants to see you, not with your parents, just her. I hesitated, conflicting emotions swirling. Camille and I had once been close, before the competition our parents fostered drove a wedge between us. I still loved her. Still remembered the sister who had once slipped into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort she couldn't find with our ever-perfect mother. Tell her I'll think about it, I said finally. He nodded, understanding. For what it's worth, I think she's starting to see the truth. It's just harder for her to accept. She has more to lose. We all have something to lose, I replied. The question is what we stand to gain. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Not the anxious dread that had accompanied every Harrington interaction for years, but something almost like hope. A sense that perhaps, from the wreckage of what I'd exposed, something better might emerge. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and began drafting my own plan. Not a response to my parents' inevitable attempts at damage control, but a vision for what healing might actually look like, what accountability and genuine change would require. The words flowed easily, powered by years of unspoken truths finally finding expression. I wrote about transparency, about equal treatment, about the difference between material support and genuine respect, about the need for acknowledgement of past harm before new trust could be built. It wasn't a punishment list or a series of demands. It was a roadmap for transformation, for a family and a business built on something stronger than appearances and power plays. As evening fell, A text from an unknown number lit up my phone. "It's Camille. Can we talk, please?" I stared at the message, feeling the weight of history between us. The sister who had stood by while I was erased, who had accepted her place at the center while I was pushed to the margins. The sister who had nevertheless been as much a product of our parents' manipulation as I had been, just in a different way. "Tomorrow," I texted back, "my place, 7 p.m. Her response was immediate. "Thank you. I'll be there." Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to an old photo album I'd kept hidden away. Pictures from before the competition, became explicit before the family narrative solidified with Camille as the star and me as the footnote. There we were, 5 and 7, arms around each other on the beach, matching gap-toothed smiles. Another from my 10th birthday, Camille helping me blow out candles, her face as excited as mine. A Christmas morning with us in identical pajamas, heads bent together over a shared gift. When had it changed? When had she stopped seeing me as her sister and started seeing me as competition? Or worse, as irrelevant? Perhaps it didn't matter when. What mattered was whether it could change again. The next day passed in a blur of work calls and emails, my professional life continuing despite the personal earthquake I'd triggered. My team at the marketing firm was in the final stages of a major campaign launch, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding in my family. There was something grounding about focusing on metrics and creative briefs, on problems that had clear solutions and dynamics that didn't carry decades of emotional baggage. By the time I logged off and prepared for Camille's visit, I felt steadier, more centered in my own worth. The knock came at exactly 7 p.m. Camille had always been punctual, one of the many traits our mother had instilled in her perfect daughter. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished princess from the wedding, replaced by someone who looked like she'd barely slept or eaten in days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, her clothes casual, jeans and a simple blouse I'd never seen before. "Hi," she said, her voice small. "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. She entered cautiously, as if stepping into foreign territory. In a way, she was. She'd never visited my apartment before, always suggesting we meet at restaurants or her place instead. "Can I get you anything? Water? Wine?" "Water would be great," she said, perching on the edge of my couch like she wasn't sure she was allowed to fully sit. I brought 2 glasses of water and sat in the armchair across from her, giving us both space. "You have a lovely place," she said, glancing around. "It's so you." "Thank you," I replied, waiting. She took a deep breath, fingers twisting together in her lap. "I don't know where to start." "The beginning is usually good," I suggested, not unkindly. She nodded, gathering herself. "I'm sorry," she said finally, looking directly at me, "for the wedding, for all of it, for standing by while they treated you like you didn't matter." The words were simple, direct. No qualifications, no excuses. It caught me off guard. "Why did you?" I asked. "Stand by, I mean. You must have seen what was happening." Pain flashed across her face. "I did. Not all at once, but over time, yes. And I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. That Mom and Dad must have reasons, that maybe you preferred being less in the spotlight." She shook her head, but that was just what I needed to believe to avoid feeling guilty. Her honesty was disarming. This wasn't the carefully curated Camille I was used to, the one who never showed vulnerability or admitted fault. "The truth is," she continued, "I was afraid. Afraid that if I defended you, they'd turn on me too. Afraid of losing my place as the favorite, afraid of facing what it said about me that I was willing to accept their love at the cost of yours." Tears welled in her eyes. "It was selfish and cowardly, and I'm so sorry." I sat with her words, feeling their weight, their sincerity. This wasn't a quick apology to smooth things over. This was recognition, accountability. "The plate of leftovers," I said quietly. "Did you know about that?" Horror crossed her face. "No, God, no. I would never have allowed that, ever." I believed her. Despite everything, I knew Camille wasn't cruel, just complicit in a system that rewarded her compliance and punished my resistance. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing the question that seemed to be following me everywhere. "With us, I mean." I considered carefully before answering. "I don't know exactly, but I think it starts with truth. With both of us acknowledging what's been happening and deciding we want something different." She nodded, hope flickering across her face. "I do want something different. I miss my sister. The real relationship we could have had if Mom and Dad hadn't turned everything into a competition." "Me too," I admitted. "Elliot and I have been talking," she said, wiping away tears, "about postponing the wedding indefinitely, about setting boundaries with my parents, about what kind of life we want to build." "And what kind is that?" "An honest one," she said simply. "Where people aren't valued for how they look in family, photos, or what connections they bring. Where love isn't conditional on performance." It was exactly what I'd always wanted to hear from her, yet I found myself cautious. "That's a big change, Camille. Are you sure you're ready for what it means?" "No," she admitted with surprising candor. "I'm terrified. My whole identity has been wrapped up in being Victoria and Richard Harrington's perfect daughter. I don't know who I am without that. But I know I don't want to be the person who accepts leftovers as her sister's portion anymore." The vulnerability in her admission touched something deep inside me. Perhaps this was what real courage looked like. Not my dramatic stand at the wedding, but this quiet willingness to question everything you've built your life around. "It won't be easy," I warned. "They won't change overnight, if at all." "I know," she said, "but I have to try. For me, for Elliot, for us." She reached across the space between us, offering her hand. "If you're willing, I'd like us to try together." I looked at her outstretched hand, thinking of all the times I'd reached out only to be left grasping air, all the moments I'd needed a sister and found only a competitor, all the wounds that couldn't be healed with a single conversation. But I also thought of those early photos, of the bond we'd had before our parents' manipulation took root, of the possibility that had always existed between us, buried but not destroyed. Slowly, I placed my hand in hers. "Together," I agreed, "but on equal terms. No more leftovers." "No more leftovers," she echoed, a promise in her voice. As we sat talking into the night, sharing truths long overdue, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take time and consistent change, but openness to the possibility of something new, something better than what had been. The plate of leftovers they'd served me at the wedding hadn't just been an insult, it had been the catalyst for transformation. The final indignity that forced me to stand in my truth, to refuse the scraps I'd been accepting for too long. Sometimes, the very thing meant to diminish you becomes the spark that ignites your liberation, the moment you realize you deserve the whole meal, not just what others decide to leave behind. Of course they are. It's easier than admitting they've been treating you as less than for years. She paused, something flickering in her eyes. "Did you know that when your grandfather and I started the company, his partners wanted me to stay home, to be the corporate wife who hosted dinners and said nothing in meetings?" I shook my head. For 3 years I sat at those dinners, smiling and pouring drinks while they discussed my ideas as if George had thought of them. One night, a potential investor made a comment about women not understanding finance. Your grandfather laughed along with him. Her gaze grew distant with memory. The next day, I withdrew half our startup capital, which came from my family, not his, and told George he could either publicly acknowledge me as a full partner or find himself without funding. I stared at her in amazement. I never knew that. Few do. It's not the kind of story that fits the Harrington mythology. She smiled. The point is, sometimes you have to force people to see you, especially when they benefit from your invisibility. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and lights twinkled on across the bay. "What happens now?" I finally asked, echoing my mother's earlier question. "That depends on what you want, dear, not on what they're willing to give you, on what you decide to create for yourself." Her words settled deep inside me, illuminating a path I hadn't fully seen before. Not a path of revenge or even reconciliation, but of creation, of building something new from the ashes of what had been burned away. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I know I'm done accepting leftovers." She squeezed my hand. "Good, because you've always deserved the whole meal, served on the finest china." 3 days after my conversation with Camille, I received a formal invitation to a family meeting at my grandmother Eleanor's estate. The card was heavy, embossed with the Harrington crest, and notably addressed to Ms. Olivia Harrington in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, not the generic Olivia my parents always used, as if I didn't deserve the family name. I arrived at Lakeview Manor precisely at noon, parking my modest sedan between my father's Bentley and Camille's Range Rover. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Another visual reminder of the hierarchy that had defined our family for decades. The grand house stood as it always had, limestone and ivy, imposing yet beautiful. As a child, I'd loved visiting Grandma Eleanor here, finding secret nooks to read in and exploring the gardens that stretched down to the private lakeshore. It was the one place in the Harrington world where I'd never felt like an afterthought. My grandmother's housekeeper, Maria, greeted me with a warm smile. "They're in the solarium, Miss Olivia. Your grandmother asked that you join them when you're ready." The "when you're ready" was pure Eleanor, a small acknowledgement that this meeting would be challenging, that I might need a moment to gather myself. I took a deep breath and made my way through the familiar corridors, past oil paintings of Harrington ancestors and antique tables bearing fresh flower arrangements. The house smelled of lemon polish and roses, comfortingly unchanged despite everything else being in flux. When I entered the solarium, 5 faces turned toward me. My parents sitting stiffly on a floral settee, Camille and Elliot side by side in matching armchairs, and my grandmother, regal in her favorite wingback chair, positioned to catch the best light. "Olivia," Eleanor said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." I crossed to her, accepting her offered hand and the subtle squeeze of reassurance that came with it. "Please sit." She indicated the empty chair beside her, the place of honor directly opposite my parents. The symbolism wasn't subtle, nor was it lost on anyone present. My mother's lips tightened slightly, my father shifted uncomfortably, and Camille gave me a small, encouraging smile. "I've called this meeting," Eleanor began once I was seated, "because it's long past time we address the dysfunction in this family. What happened at Camille's wedding was merely a symptom of a much deeper problem." My father cleared his throat. "Mother, I'm not sure this is productive. Olivia made a scene." "Richard," Eleanor cut him off sharply, "you will listen. For once in your life you will listen without interrupting or trying to control the narrative. Is that clear?" He blinked, startled by her tone, then nodded stiffly. "Good." She turned to me. "Olivia, I believe you have something you'd like to present." I reached into my bag and withdrew the folder containing the document I'd been refining all week. Not demands, but a vision for change, for healing. "Before I share this," I said, looking directly at my parents, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about truth and transformation. My mother's gaze flickered with something like surprise. She'd expected rage, perhaps, or a list of grievances. Instead, I placed the folder on the coffee table between us and began to outline a path forward that would require all of us to change, to grow. For years, I said, this family has operated on a clear hierarchy with Camille at the center and me at the margins. That's not just hurtful, it's destructive, both to me and to Camille. Camille nodded, a small gesture of solidarity. That would have been unthinkable a week ago. The leftovers I was served at the wedding weren't just about food, I continued. They were symbolic of how I've been treated my entire life. Given the minimum required to maintain appearances while being expected to be grateful for scraps. My father started to speak, but Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him. What I'm proposing isn't that you suddenly start treating me like Camille. I don't want to replace her at the center of your universe. I want to dismantle the entire system that requires someone to be at the center and someone else to be at the margins. I opened the folder and began to outline my vision, a family council where decisions would be made collaboratively, transparent, financial dealings, an end to the manipulation of others for business advantage, and most importantly, a commitment to honesty about the past as the foundation for a different future. When I finished, the room was silent. My father looked stunned, my mother thoughtful. Elliot was nodding slightly while Camille's eyes were bright with unshed tears. This is not what I expected, my father finally said. What did you expect, Dad? That I'd demand money, a bigger position in the company? That's never been what I wanted. Then what do you want? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. I want to be seen, I said simply. Not as competition. Or for Camille, not as an inconvenience to be managed, but as a full human being with my own value, separate from what I can do for the Harrington image or business interests. Eleanor smiled, a small, satisfied curl of her lips. Well said. My mother leaned forward slightly. And the SEC filing? The evidence you mentioned at the wedding? It exists, I confirmed. Everything I said was true. But whether it goes beyond this room depends on what happens next. My father's face hardened. So it is blackmail. No, Richard, Eleanor interjected. It's accountability, something you've managed to avoid for far too long. She turned to me. Olivia has shown remarkable restraint. She could have destroyed this family's reputation and business with what she knows. Instead, she's offering a chance to build something better. Her gaze swept the room. I, for one, intend to take it. The endorsement from the family matriarch carried weight. My father's expression shifted from defensive to calculating, always the businessman, weighing options and potential outcomes. The proposal requires acknowledgement of past actions, he noted, tapping the document, including the situation with Ben. Yes, I said firmly. No more gaslighting, no more pretending things didn't happen, or that I'm too sensitive for noticing them. Real change starts with truth. Camille cleared her throat. I think we should do it. She glanced at Elliot, who nodded encouragement. All of it. The truth, the changes, everything Olivia is asking for. My parents exchanged a look, a silent communication honed over decades of marriage and business partnership. We need time. And to review this properly, my mother said finally. Of course, I agreed, but not to find loopholes or ways to maintain the status quo while appearing to change. This is a real crossroads, Mom. The old way of doing things is over, one way or another. Eleanor stood, signaling the end of the formal discussion. I suggest we all take a few days to reflect. Then we'll reconvene here next weekend to finalize our path forward. As everyone began to gather their things, my father approached me, Something uncertain in his stance, so unlike his usual commanding presence. "That day," he said quietly, "with Ben, I told myself I was protecting you from someone who wasn't good enough, who was only interested in our connections and money." "He wasn't," I replied. "He loved me, and you took that away because it didn't fit your plans." Pain flickered across his face, real pain, not the performative concern I was used to seeing. "I've made mistakes, Olivia, more than I realized." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement. The first crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable for decades. As I prepared to leave, Camille caught up with me on the front steps. "Can we talk? Just us?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Let's walk down to the lake." We strolled in silence along the familiar path, past gardens bursting with summer blooms and ancient oak trees that had witnessed generations of Harrington family drama. When we reached the small stone bench overlooking the water, Camille spoke. "Do you remember coming here as kids? How we used to wade in the shallows, looking for interesting rocks?" I smiled at the memory. "You always found the prettiest ones." "Because you showed me where to look," she said softly. "You were always better at seeing what was hidden beneath the surface." The admission hung between us, loaded with meaning, beyond childhood rock hunting. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued. "About the hierarchy Mom and Dad created with me at the center. I never questioned it because it benefited me, but it's hurt both of us, hasn't it? Me in ways I'm only starting to understand." I studied my sister's face, so like mine in some ways, yet she'd always been cast as the beautiful one, the perfect one. "How has it hurt you?" She gazed out at the water. "I've spent my entire life trying to maintain my position, terrified of disappointing them or being replaced. Every achievement wasn't just about success, it was about security, about ensuring I stayed worthy of being the favorite." She turned to me, eyes glistening. "Do you know how exhausting that is? How empty it feels to never know if you're loved, for yourself, or for what you represent?" The revelation struck me deeply. While I'd been fighting for scraps of attention and recognition, Camille had been trapped in a gilded cage of expectations and conditional love. "We've both been manipulated," I said, "just in different ways." She nodded. "When you stood up at the wedding, my first thought was anger. How dare you ruin my perfect day? But then I realized nothing about that day was really mine. Not the guest list, not the seating arrangements, not even Elliot." Her voice broke slightly. "They were using my wedding to manipulate his family's business, Liv, using me as the bait." I reached for her hand, a gesture of solidarity that felt both foreign and familiar. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt you." "I know," she said, "and maybe it needed to happen. Maybe we both needed to see the truth." As we sat together, watching sunlight dance across the lake's surface, I felt a shift in our relationship. Not a complete healing, but the beginning of something new. Something built on truth rather than competition, on solidarity rather than division. "I want us to be real sisters," Camille said suddenly. "Not the roles they assigned us, but actual sisters who support each other, who tell each other the truth, who don't accept being pitted against each other anymore." "I'd like that," I replied, "but it will take work. We have decades of patterns to break." She smiled, a genuine expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "I'm willing if you are. No more center and margins, just two sisters finding our own way." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.